Okay, so what does a pro-vegan researcher have to say about the carnivore diet? I bet you can guess, but let's check it out anyway. So this is one with Dr. Christopher Gardner. Now, we've made videos with him before. In general, I mean, I sort of like his approach, but in general, he's been spinning the data to give sort of a plant-based impression in recent years, ever since he did that A to Z study, which was a very good study almost 20 years ago. Let's see what he has to say. This is on the channel Zoe. We've talked with them before too. We've talked about Dr. Tim Spector and his take on gut health. Let's see what Gardner has to say about the carnivore diet.
Okay, Christopher, I'm intrigued by this one. What is the name of this diet that seems to be made up entirely of meat?
The carnivore diet.
Well, that's certainly an unusual choice.
So there's no carnivore diet, right? A diet that's, for example, a diet that's purely chicken, for example, would be nutritionally insufficient for all kinds of reasons, right? Number one, it doesn't have enough fat. So we have to, in some ways, we have to define our terms a lot better. And this is as much to my friends, and myself in the carnivore community. So for me, what I mean carnivore diet, I don't mean the carnivore diet as if it's one thing. I mean any diet that includes at least that A is, I would say, ketogenic. So this is where I differentiate. I differ from folks like Paul Saladino and so on. Like if you're not low carb, at least, what are you doing? It doesn't make any sense. Number one. Number two is you're getting most of your food from animal protein. So that's meat and eggs and maybe dairy. And number three is that when we say most, it's 75, 80%. So that's sort of the basic parameters. Within that, you can have a diet that's whatever it is. For another diet that would be nutritionally incomplete is mostly fish, because again, fish doesn't have enough fat. So within that, you need to actually be getting about 30% of your calories, although calories isn't the right way to measure it, but 30% of your food from protein and the remaining 70% mostly from fat. If you're not doing those things, it's not going to be a very good diet, whether it's carnivore or not, whatever you want to call it.
And I'm surprised that this is something that people would actually go for, in real.
Let me just check how old is this video? It's only a year old, so I don't know if these guys are a bit behind the trend or what, but no one should be surprised. This is pretty big right now.
But it turns out, we did a little bit of research, the carnivore diet has become increasingly popular, in no small part due to a rather famous podcaster. So why, other than celebrity endorsement, might someone go for this diet?
My only impression here that I can take away is people like the taste of meat and they want an excuse to eat it.
So it's not my experience. So when we introduce this to people who just want to lose weight or want to get rid of their autoimmune diseases or whatever, they don't like having a diet that's mostly meat. Many of them don't like it, right? We have to sort of convince them, and not just because of the taste. I think many of them don't like the taste of meat, but also because they've been told for so long that vegetables are healthy that they cannot believe that a diet with limited numbers of vegetables or hardly any vegetables, that could be healthy, right? So I think vegans or pro-vegan sort of people have this impression that people are just lusting after meat because of their taste buds. And I would say in my experience, the taste buds are have very little to do with it. It's about trying to find, for us, it's about trying to find human appropriate food in a very toxic food environment.
Done.
Hi, couldn't the bell. So what exactly are people eating on this diet?
Yeah, I've never seen a formal write-up of this. So could you eat eggs? So eggs aren't meat. So is it really?
Are snakes carnivores? Snakes eat eggs, right? So yeah, I take the point. An egg isn't meat, but we're not talking about like a strict. Some people are doing the strict line diet, which is just beef and salt and water. Fine, but most of us are doing a diet that includes eggs and some dairy and chicken and other things as well, right?
No dairy, because that's not carnivorous. It's really just meat.
So that does sound pretty tough. What would happen if you ate this way?
So if I got to do a study, I would certainly want to look at the microbiome.
So we do have anecdotal case reports, including from Ben Azadi is the one. I think he's shared his numbers in better gut health after doing carnivore than before doing carnivore. Of course, he was already low carb. I think his channel is called Keto something or other. So he was already low carb, and then he did carnivore for, I want to say 3 months, and his gut health improved by every metric, by diversity, by whatever the specific bacterial strains that people think of as healthy, they all went up, and the unhealthy ones went down. So we do have some anecdotal data, but for me, the microbiome is like it's a cart before the horse thing. Like, you will have the microbiome that you need to help process your food. If you eat a lot of vegetables, you have a microbiome that's appropriate to eating a lot of vegetables. if you eat a lot of meat, you'll have a different microbiome that's appropriate to digesting a lot of meat, right?
So the microbiome gets fed by
Which is all the bacteria in our gut.
indigestible carbohydrates.
It doesn't get fed just by fiber. Indigestible carbohydrates is fiber. I'm glad he uses that term. So if something's indigestible, don't eat it. That seems like a good idea. And there are plenty of animals with microbiomes that don't eat fiber, right? So saying that that's the only thing the microbiome can eat is silly. Can the microbiome eat it in certain circumstances? Yes, certainly. But it's not the only thing.
Don't get digested in our upper small intestine. They all go to our colon, where the bacteria of the microbiome, the main source of bacteria in our body.
The main source of bacteria, that may technically be true in terms of numbers, but the brain has a microbiome, the heart has a microbiome. Like, we're learning all these things that actually there's so much more to the human organism than just human cells, and any animal organism is what we're learning. So yeah, it's not. I don't think he's saying it's just the gut, but the gut is less part of the picture maybe than we thought a year or two ago, or 4 or 5 years ago.
That fiber for fuel, and it has, we're learning all about the microbiome and the potential health benefits. We've been doing a lot of studies on this. Meat, by definition, has no carbohydrate at all and no fiber. Fibers are carbohydrate-like substances, so you would get none. You'd probably be pretty constipated, but...
And that is also a misnomer, right? So we have this study here, dietary fiber and wrong one. This one here is the one I'm thinking of. Stopping or reducing dietary fiber intake reduces constipation and its associated system. So in this study, 63 people found that a zero fiber diet reduced their constipation to zero. So these are people with really bad symptoms of constipation. When they took the fiber out of the diet, it completely went away. So anyone, again, this is a nutrition researcher, and I don't want to be disrespectful to Dr. Gardner, but it's like, dude, if you don't know the basics, what are we talking about? If you think fiber is important to digestion, how do you explain this study, right?
Could you live on this diet for 6 months or a year?
Yeah, so 6 months or a year. We have people who've been doing it a lot longer.
View all the sort of the essential nutrients that you need.
Yeah, I don't understand how that's possible. So of all the...
So this is someone who's supposed to be the leading nutrition expert in the world, and he doesn't understand how people are going for years on this without needing supplementation, apparently. But we do have that evidence, right?
Food groups. If you look at our US dietary guidelines, it sort of outlines, here's all the vitamins, here's all the minerals, here's different types of carbs and proteins.
US dietary guidelines are not a very good starting point, are they? I mean, first of all, they're calculated in a way to avoid deficiencies, right? So they may not have enough of other things. Also, they're calculated often using the median, right? So you take a big population and you sort of look at a particular nutrient of concern like zinc, and you say, okay, look, half of the people are sort of at this level of zinc, so we'll make that the normal or the normal range, and then based on that we'll calculate the daily values of zinc. Not super helpful methodology, I should say.
And fats. You get that from a varied diet. The more restrictive your diet is, the more likely you will have nutrient deficiencies.
This is someone who advocates a vegan diet, so he's advocating a different kind of restrictive diet, right?
None of those. Fruits, grains, vegetables, none of them have...
Fruits, grains, vegetables. What are we talking about here? Like, what are the nutrients of concern? What are you interested in talking about? Because like grains have so many anti-nutrients that we can't really talk about nutrients in grains, right? Like, you're not going to absorb those. Also because of dietary fiber and so on. Also, if you take out the fiber, if you make it just pure white rice or white bread or whatever, then you're talking about increasing the glycemic index to the point where that's going to cause another series of harms and potentially cause deficiencies later on down the road. So yeah, we need to be specific here.
All the nutrients. You need a variety in your diet, and you could not get that from a meat-only diet.
The most commonly cited claim for why you should follow this diet is apparently improvements in autoimmune conditions and type 2 diabetes. And there are also claims around weight loss. What are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, weight loss would be easier to answer, because when you have such a restrictive diet, you might be hungry for a piece of bread. Nope, can't have that. Hungry for some beans. Nope, can't have that. Hungry for some vegetables. Nope, can't have that.
I mean, again, this is someone who hasn't actually been on this kind of diet, who's giving it, like, when you do this, yes, the first day or two might be difficult, even longer, maybe the first couple of weeks. But after you do that, your cravings go away. You don't crave these things, right? You no longer crave the whatever it may be, the pastas, the breads, and so on. That's even the case on a low carb diet. stopped craving most of that stuff a long time ago myself. So I don't know what he's talking about.
You hungry for another piece of steak?
Got it. I can definitely see, like, you go into a coffee shop or something and there's like all of these pastries and you're like, no, I can only have steak. And they're like, we're a coffee shop, we don't have any steak. So you just have to be hungry for a few more hours. So I can see how in the short term you're going to restrict. How will that play out in the long term?
So in the long term, the balance that we're not getting here is that's excess protein and excess fat. The excess protein is going to get
Excess protein will just be, if there is excess protein, it'll just be excreted, right? Some of it will be turned into sugar, right? Some of it turns into glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis. Some of it will just be excreted through, the urea cycle by the kidneys and so on in the urine. So I don't see how that's an issue. Excess fat, I suppose that could be an issue, but it's much less of an issue if you're not consuming carbohydrates, right? When you consume fats and carbohydrates at the same time, your mitochondria get confused. We've talked about this with Professor Bart Kay and others, something called the Randall cycle, where basically because glucose is so toxic in the bloodstream, your mitochondria have to prioritize that. The fat sort of stays behind and it can cause problems. So, but also I would say you're very unlikely to overeat if you're doing a strict version of the carnivore diet. Like, it's next to impossible. I would challenge anyone to do it. In fact, it's not easy. So I don't know what excess fat means. I don't think he knows what excess fat means. You have to define these terms.
get turned into carbohydrate. The fat from meat is going to be a lot of saturated fat. So in the world,
saturated fat, of course, is the most stable kind of fat, much more stable than polyunsaturated fats, which tend to oxidize both in the body and outside the body. So saturated fats, as a general rule, would probably be preferable to unsaturated fats, right?
of people with diabetes, it's well recognized that they have 3 times the heart disease rate of people without diabetes. So if you're
3 times the heart disease rate, a huge increase.
So interesting. So I think that I think that may not be correct. I mean, I think it's more like 6 times the heart disease rate. And I think the reason that the number may look more like 3 is because some of the population who are diagnosed as not having diabetes actually do have whatever it may be. If they don't have high sugar levels, they have high insulin levels, they have metabolic disease already. So they're not being diagnosed with diabetes, but they are in some way sort of pre-diabetic or on their way to diabetes. And that's why they're manifesting heart disease in a large number of cases.
And heart disease is the number 1 cause of death in the US. So if you're addressing the diabetes by avoiding the carbs and having the saturated fat, you're setting yourself up for other health consequences.
There is zero data to back that up, right? Because again, saturated fat consumption. Sorry, he just said saturated fat consumption causes diabetes. Is that what he said? Diabetes is defined exclusively as high blood sugar in the blood, exclusively. And there's no mechanism whereby you can consume as much saturated fat as you possibly can. You can eat sticks of butter all day long. Your blood sugar will never go up. It can't, right? Just by definition. Maybe, I mean, of course, the blood sugar has to regulate. And if you have too much energy coming into the form of fats, then yeah, I suppose over the long run, it will trend upwards, your blood sugar, because through other processes, you're going to be raising that blood sugar. But it's not going to cause diabetes. That is very, very, very unlikely. It's carbohydrates that are causing the diabetes. So when you take the carbohydrates out, you would see improvements. This whole saturated fat causes diabetes. Like, I've never understood that. Like, tell me a mechanism whereby that happens, other than the Randall cycle, which is clear and which will only happen in the presence of carbohydrates, right?
The result of your strategy.
So you don't think this is a good diet for someone with type 2 diabetes?
I would not promote this. I would promote less carbs and unsaturated fats.
Less carbs and unsaturated fats. Okay. You can promote that. That would also work, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I'm not a huge... Seed oils are a problem, but seed oils are mostly a problem because they're oxidized. And these kind of like pro-vegan folks tend to recommend olive oils, which generally... extra virgin, sort of unfiltered olive oils and so on, which you can sort of smell if they've gone rancid. So maybe, I mean, that would certainly be better than just a standard diet, right?
Now, obviously, there are animals that do live a carnivore diet, right? So there are probably people hitting here with like their cats wandering around behind them, and I think they are eating something quite similar to this diet. So is it that it's not impossible to imagine an animal that is a carnivore? You're saying basically, as human beings, that's not a good diet for us. I'm thinking about like being in the zoo, right? We know all the animals need a different diet.
So the thing is that humans in the wild, right, we did have a hypercarnivorous way of life, right? We were eating 70, 75, 80%. In fact, probably more of our food from meat. And we did that for hundreds of thousands of years, right? From the earliest hominins, so that's about 1.5 to 2 million years ago, straight up to the agricultural revolution. So that's only 10,000 so-called Neolithic revolutions, 10, 12,000 years ago. So 1.5 million years or 2 million years on one side, 10,000 years roughly on the other side. You tell me which is bigger, right? Not that the bigger is necessarily better, but there's been no genetic change. Our genes haven't changed for 350,000 years. And the diet that we've been having for 340 of those 350,000 years is a hyper-carnivorous diet.
Yeah.
So,
and they have different teeth and a different intestinal tract structure that we don't have.
Yeah, but you're talking about felines, right? So okay, fine. Their evolutionary path to hypercarnivory was different, understood. And they can eat things like they can eat much higher protein diets. Humans have to eat higher fat diets, right? So I can agree that, we're not cats. I can agree with that statement, but that doesn't mean that we are not hypercarnivores. Is that clear?
Have omnivorous teeth and omnivorous intestinal tract. The one human population that makes the most sense to me is the Inuits, or the Native Alaskans, who picture frost and ice everywhere. You're in an igloo. There's really nowhere to plant any vegetables or get any fresh fruit.
Interestingly, the Inuit people that we know of, they actually did trade, and we have evidence of them trading for a little bit of plant matter in various seasons. So plant matter was highly prized. They were not exclusively eating meat, but they, like all other human populations at a certain point in time, they were eating mostly meat, right?
There really are some stories of those folks eating polar bear and seal and just all aquatic or I don't know if you call them livestock, but animals in the winter, when for months at a time, you would have access to no plant foods whatsoever. They actually had a pretty good track record of health, which is fascinating. But part of that, again, goes back to how much physical activity it took for them to retrieve all these foods. They spent a lot of time getting these foods. And maybe at some point, that very extreme level of physical activity is protective of this. But those populations don't eat that way anymore when they have access.
They don't eat that way anymore. And man, are they suffering the consequences of that, right? You can see my interview with Joseph Pitawanakwat from a couple of years ago, talking about the dangers of people leaving their traditional foods and starting to eat at like Walmart or whatever it is. I mean, it's just terrible.
To other foods, they enjoy a lot of other foods.
That's really interesting. So they can live on this for months at a time through the winter in this extreme. And I'm guessing in the summer they were like really happy to add some like some vegetable to their diet.
Not there to ask them, but yeah, that just again seems like a very limited diet. And humans love variety of taste.
Just because you love variety, does it mean humans love variety? Like most of us, I think I'm the same way. Like I will find a food that I like. So at the moment, I was doing lamb for years. Well, for maybe about a year. It was just different forms of lamb. Now I found that I like sort of chuck roast and chuck steak. This is recent. I'm experimenting with it. I might go back to the lamb, but I'm eating chuck roast every day. I'm eating sort of chuck kebabs. Yeah, kebabs made with, or kebab meat, right, with some salt and pepper or whatever. And I'm eating that every day, and I do not miss having anything else. I might have some eggs, like so. I have a certain meal. I have the same meal that I'm eating pretty much every day, and I do not feel the need for more variety than what I'm getting.
And texture and type, so seems too restrictive.
And are there any studies about the carnivore diet that tell us what happens when you follow it?
So there really aren't any studies. There aren't any large groups of people that have followed this that you could track. We have lots of studies where they've tracked hundreds of thousands of people for a long time, and there's really not very many carnivores to study that way. There was one small study that came out fairly recently in the last few years that was a social media study. So they put it out on social media to have people self-report what they were doing. And it had to be people who self-reported being on the diet for at least 6 months. So there's a problem there because that's fairly short term. But I think some of the people who wrote in and said, I have been on this diet for years, it's a very self-selected population.
Yeah, I mean, all the problems, I'm familiar with the study. I think it was out of Harvard that it came out of. I'm familiar with that study, and I agree with the limitations. Like it's not a very good study.
Self-report is always a little touchy because were they being completely honest with what they said?
But what he just said discredits all of his work. That's not true. He's one of the few people who actually does research in the lab, and sort of puts people into metabolic wards and so on. But a lot of his work is also looking at this population epidemiological data and drawing conclusions, which is all self-reported. It's all based on food frequency questionnaires. So basically what he just said calls into question the entire discipline of nutrition science.
So between a lack of accuracy and a lack of generalizability. It is the only study I know of, but it's not very sound in terms of scientific design. But it's there because it's in the absence. There were no other studies available, so it's better than the other studies because there aren't any. But it's not very compelling case.
And why do you think it feels like there are so many nutrition science studies, Christopher, of like almost anything you can imagine? So why aren't there any proper studies of this carnivore diet?
Oh, you can't. So the kind of study that I do personally is I like the kind where you recruit people, you randomly assign them to A or B, and then you learn, because it's a randomized control trial, which one was better. I don't think anybody would fund me for this, and I don't think I would ever take it on because the recruitment would be virtually impossible. Who's willing to either be a carnivore or the other option? Let's say it's carnivore versus vegan. Sure, that would be a wonderful head-to-head. I'm absolutely willing to be carnivore or vegan and give up everything else I eat just because you're curious, Professor Gardner. Sure, I will not only happily sign up, I will adhere to that diet, I promise, every single day for months or years to come. Yeah, it's an unanswerable question. I can't get people to sign up for that.
I mean, you could still design a trial if you wanted to, right? Yeah, I mean, there could be an element, like it maybe it wouldn't be a randomized controlled trial, but you could still do a controlled trial. So there may be people, I mean, I myself might be willing to do this, where you give me like 3 different protocols and I will cycle through them. So let's say the 3 protocols that I would design if it were my study, one would be, say, a higher carb. So say like 150 to 200 grams. Say 200 grams is probably the most I'd be willing to tolerate. 200 grams of carbohydrate for 6 weeks. Yeah. Then we drop it to 100 grams. Then we drop it to effectively 0 with the carnivore, right? See what happens. And you can test different outcomes. You can test gut health if you want to. You can test microbiota if you want to. Those are I mean, I think I could not only be part of it, I think I could probably recruit 100 people to be part of that, because as long as we're not going crazy here, as long as we're not going like vegan, I would consider that's just insane. But if you use carbohydrate as the variable and you say, okay, we're going to do medium, 200 is still low carb by some people's definition, but in my opinion, it's not. 100 is less than 100 or less than 75. Yeah, now we're in business. And then 0, that's where I sort of live, right? So.
And are you worried that without having studied the carnivore diet, actually, it might be a really healthy diet?
There's enough scientific literature to support that you don't need the randomized control trial of carnivores to be able to answer the question, partly acknowledging that But
you can't do that, right? You can't, because you can't say we have all this literature in a completely different population and we're going to apply it to this other population. Like, you can't do that, right? So again, the case studies, the whatever it is, Sean Baker and, those kind of case studies, Bart K, whoever you want to pick, those kind of case studies are actually far more interesting than the existing data. Like way, way, way more interesting, because the existing data is not done on populations that were eating an ancestrally appropriate human diet.
Couldn't get a trial like that accomplished.
So Christopher, what's your verdict on the carnivore diet?
Yeah, my verdict here is not just thumbs down, but double thumbs down. This is just on a par with the most restrictive diet, short of maybe the breatharian.
Yeah, okay. Breatharian is what he was about to say. All right, whatever. Comparing us. So what I would have to ask, his basic argument is coming down to it's too restrictive. And what I would say is, okay, I can admit, or I can accept that we are advocating a quote unquote restrictive diet. But do you know what's more restrictive is type 2 diabetes. What's more restrictive is waking up every day with knee pain and joint pain and losing my eyesight as I was, and being addicted to these freaking asthma pumps. Where are they? Usually I keep them here, but they're somewhere else right now. They all expired in 2018 because when I changed my diet, I didn't need those asthma pumps anymore. So if you ask me, would I rather eat and also what's nice is like feeling good, like being able to have endless energy at the tennis courts, endless energy at the gym, being able to do whatever the hell I want, being able to keep up with my teenage daughter when I need to, whatever she's up to. Those things feel good, and those things are important. And to me, it's more important to maybe eat what some would consider a restrictive diet. I don't consider it restrictive, and live an unrestricted lifestyle than to eat an unrestricted diet and live a restricted lifestyle. Does that make sense? So as we get older, there's always going to be trade-offs. And for me, the trade-off was, in the beginning, I'll admit it wasn't necessarily easy. I wasn't necessarily, I wasn't feeling satisfied with some of my meals, probably because I didn't know how to do it right. And the mistakes that I find is that a lot of people are just under-consuming fat. So if you feel hungry or if you feel unsatisfied after your carnivore meal or whatever it is that you're having, add some more butter, dude. Add some more, beef fat. Add some more tallow, whatever it is. When you increase the fat, we tend to see that satiety improves a lot. And not just the satiety, other things. We really need that fat, and we underestimate the amount of fat that we need. So those are some thoughts. And the other thought is, like, I respect Dr. Gardner, as I've said in other videos. One of his studies, I think it's called the A to Z study, fantastic stuff. It really does. It makes a very good case for the carnivore diet, to be perfectly honest, for the Atkins version of the carnivore diet, right? But since then, he's basically become a sort of pro-vegan shill, and he's not really. He put his finger on the scale. He's only interested in metrics that will prove veganism is better. And I don't think that that's good science. In fact, I think it's the opposite of good science. So anyway, some food for thought. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next one.